we're back with our discussion after taking a look at the market figures. Let's focus on the past year from the viewpoint of maritime insurance for the French market, a market which, as we saw, is benefiting from a positive pathway. We have with us Pierre Delplanque, head of the transport department at Cécile Saint-Honoré. We have 4 players mobilized for the French markets. I'll hand over to you. Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I'll show you our speakers, starting with Marie-Noëlle Tinedièvre, Deputy Director of the French Maritime Cluster, who's going to talk about the maritime ecosystem in which we are working as members of the community of maritime and transport insurers. Elisabeth Pinquier, Regional Head of Underwriting for Marine of the Mediterranean region for AGCS. Michel Braffman, Chief Operating Officer, La Réunion Aérienne. Michel has been in the aeronautics business for over 25 years after scientific and commercial studies at Centrale Paris and ESSEC, and also a diploma in molecular biology, if my memory serves. And Laurent Blasquez, here representing agents. Laurent has served in different positions with an international career before moving to the management of the Sampo Group, Sampo, which a few years ago acquired Martin Boulard. And after the shareholder stepped out, you took over this agent, and you're now the chair of the Agents Union in France, and it's in this position that you're going to talk about the role of agents on the French market. I'll hand over to Marie-Noëlle, who's going to introduce us to the elements of the ecosystem in which we are working. Good morning, one and all. First of all, thank you to all the organizers for inviting me for this new edition of PARISMAT. And I'm delighted to be able to talk about the French Maritime Cluster and its ecosystem in which PARISMAT is involved. It's an initiative supported from 2016 onwards by the CNF and now a component of the CMF. The French Maritime Cluster is an NGO, an actor in the sustainable development of blue growth. Since 2006, has been bringing together all players in activities related to the sea. It now has 430 member entities, companies of all sizes, competitiveness clusters, laboratories, research centers, schools, universities, training centers, local authorities, and also the French Navy. The CMF has 3 key actions: institutional communications, operational synergies, and influence actions. And the CMF is involved with decision makers and public authorities upon its members' requests for strategic issues that have an importance for the whole of maritime value chain. For the CMF, blue growth is necessarily sustainable growth. So that was my overview. Caring about preserving resources, it relies on a blue economy with 3 pillars: social, environmental, and scientific. Blue growth should protect and restore the environment, thereby generating development for its economic activities. I'll start my presentation with a few figures. You should know that according to an OECD estimate, the global maritime economy in 2015 was $1.5 trillion and should double to reach $3 trillion by 2030. In France, based on the latest figures of the CMF that you can see here on screen, the maritime value chain had revenues of around 92 billion euros for roughly 360,000 direct jobs and 500,000 jobs if you include tourism. By 2030, the maritime cluster reckons that it should be possible to reach revenues of 150 billion euros and roughly 1 million jobs. Here you can see details about the figures, the economic weight, sectoral figures that you can download with the presentation, and you can see on the website here you've got the various sectoral figures and the relative weight and the overall figures that I've just announced. Why do we think that we can further grow our revenues and jobs? We've got a concept at the cluster called Factor 20. Factor 20, which relies on the 5 traditional value chains: maritime transport, naval industry, sea products, energy resources like oil and gas, and undersea cables. There are also 5 emerging chains like renewable energies. I won't get into details so as not to take too much time. You've got these first 10 reasons. And as you know, France is a country with great engineering and expertise resources in at least 8 cross-cutting fields, including insurance and brokering services. That's 18 reasons. The 19th is France's economic exclusive zone, with its 18 million square kilometers, giving France a presence worldwide on all seas of the globe. So it has a fundamental role to play environmentally and economically, and also geostrategically. And reason 20 is France's heritage with global leaders in all sectors of the maritime economy. So many sectors that should enable France to be there for maritimization, as we call it. It can also rely on the public authorities, the Ministry of the Sea, the General Secretariat for the Sea, the French Navy, the Maritime Affairs Department, diplomatic services, and also the whole economic fabric of private players, corporations, and major unions and federations. The cluster in the world. This cluster is also present with overseas clusters that started in 2007. There are 7 overseas clusters in existence. They are now facilitated by Alexandre Muscovich on our team. And we also have an international presence because we've got partnerships with chambers of commerce. The French Chamber of Commerce in Greece, but also the France-Norway Chamber of Commerce, the CCI in Singapore, and we shortly struck a partnership with French-speaking countries in West Africa, especially with CMAF, so with several players in maritime insurance that are involved in these actions. Well, in 2020, we had webinars, but we recently created a synergy group with CMAF to develop blue growth in the countries of the Gulf of Guinea. Here, I wanted to show you more details about what the cluster does. These are the synergy groups that exist and in which the maritime players, especially insurers and insurance brokers, get together. Issues like maritime drones, autonomous vessels, cybersecurity workshops, marine renewables, attractiveness of sea activities, professional equality, the high depths, and preventative archaeology. Specific actions, also a flagship action for the cluster since 2019, creating a coalition of players around and for the energy and economical transition in the maritime sector. In order to reach the IMO's 2050 goals, we need to develop new technological solutions and rethink operations and interfaces between ports and vessels. Risks are heightened with new energies, new automated or even autonomous systems, and challenges related to biodiversity. Insurance should come into its own in the zero emissions program to support industry and territories in future solutions by including risk. This coalition, as you can see here on this next slide, brings together all these players. It's managed by the cluster, but you've got support from this Ministry of the Sea, the ADEME, ship owners, energy companies, and major sectoral federations. And so we're looking forward to the insurance business joining this coalition, so don't hesitate to join us. Another action by the cluster is about jobs. As I listed earlier, amongst the synergy groups here, we have the synergy group on the attractiveness of marine jobs for the CMF. They contributed to organizing the Jobs Week. That's the 3rd edition, and you've got the figures for this 3rd edition. It was a hybrid edition, but there were 260 actions on the mainland and overseas that were organized. And we're inviting you to join the next edition that will take place in March 2022. We also contributed to creating a specific job placement agency for maritime, and we also have an information gateway for marine jobs. And we shortly created a series of e-sessions every first Thursday of the month for jobs and training, and we had one then devoted to jobs and maritime training for members of the CMF. Another action we were asked to develop, and that I do very gladly, gender equality. Since 2013, the cluster's been very active around this matter of gender equality. First creating the Synergy Group, then there were two flagship actions that I wanted to focus on. Talk about the Aile de l'Océan operation so that we can support the companies that need to promote marine jobs, especially amongst young women, with a partner called Elle Bouge. Through testimonials from sponsors, we help young women discover their jobs. And so the Aile de l'Océan operation took place in 2018 physically, and since then it's been with video conferencing, but we hope soon to have a national event next year. And I hope that insurers and all maritime insurance players will join us to spread the word about the great jobs in marine insurance. We also have an equality observatory between men and women, because if you can't measure anything, you can't make progress. So we have an observatory that collects figures via a survey that was conducted 3 times. And here I'm very happy to show you the 43 logos of the respondents amongst the partners of the Equality Observatory. There are companies, but also shippers, harbors, schools and universities, naval industry, Ifremer, the Navy, and the Directorate for Maritime Affairs. They responded, so that's about 10% of members of the cluster. By responding to this survey with support from Odyssée Développement, a consultancy, we conducted the survey, and out of the 43 companies that responded for 74,000 jobs, of which 15,830 women, so 21.4% of headcount that are women. It's not enough. We can't be happy about it. If you compare it with the national level, the level is at 48.6. We're at 21.4, so we can do better in maritime. But you can see that it's increasing. That was the 3rd survey. It's making slow progress. Previously, we were below 20%. We're now above 21, and I think we can do better in the future. A quick word about one of our outputs in this gender equality group. You also asked me to talk about it. As part of this observatory, we extracted the best practices put in place by companies. Based on these best practices, we've created best practice crib sheets, as it were, that you can download. They're available for free on the website of the cluster, and you can see 8 themes that were dealt with, also with testimonials from companies to illustrate those. And I'll invite you to take a look at them. We get good feedback about them because it's inspiring. Companies, HR departments, management can look at what's done and put these best practices in place so that they can accelerate feminization in the companies of the maritime sector for better gender equality. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about my other activity in parallel with the cluster, the Wister France, that I'm chairing, an association of women in the maritime sector. We're also a member of a network with 4,000 women in the world in dozens of countries. There are 17 of us in France. We organize events and invite leaders of the maritime world to speak about challenges in their business. And we also organize events between members and site visits. And we're also involved in the General Conference on Maritime Activities. You can see the picture at the top right. And we also promote women in the maritime sector. In the press, we organize our own webinars. And since the end of 2020 till now, we've organized a cycle of webinars about the eco-energy transition of the maritime sector. And of course, we're inviting men and women experts of this subject. Another word? Yeah, very quickly then. Sorry if I took too long, really sorry, but I also wanted to show you amongst the members of the cluster that are watching us. Here you have a list of roughly 15 entities that are members of the cluster in the insurance sector, insurers, brokers, or federations. And I'll finish on this last slide. We've created a task force, Risks and Insurance of the Cluster, which is a new initiative facilitated by Mathieu Berrurier. Hello, Mathieu. This task force will help us respond in emergency events that affect the maritime community, to think collectively about substantive issues and proposals by the management bodies of the cluster in cooperation with the Committee of French Ship Owners to answer questions asked by members of the CMF, like renewable marine energy, things that the cluster is not necessarily well equipped to answer. So we use this task force, and I'm inviting you to join the cluster, and I would be delighted to answer all your questions, and thank you. Thank you very much, Marie-Noëlle, for this very comprehensive overview of the economic landscape and the jobs landscape in the maritime sector, with a very strong message, as you highlighted, and we heard that, objectives to have more women working in jobs in this sector. Before coming back to maritime, let's take a quick detour to aviation and space. When I started insurance brokering 25 years ago, my first president started talking about telling me, you'll do a bit of aviation insurance, it's very interesting, you'll move around, there are clients worldwide, and indeed I discovered an exciting sector. And I also discovered that worldwide players came to Paris to get insurance. Back then there was a very good wine cellar at the Réunion Aérienne. That's why the risk managers of airlines came there, but not only, because there were other players like Allianz and AXA. They didn't have the same wine cellar, and risk managers also came to see them. So with Michel Braffman, we'll spend roughly 10 minutes explaining what are the strengths of the French market in this insurance sector. Very gladly, thank you, Pierre. Good morning, good afternoon, one and all. It is my pleasure and honor to put into context the attractiveness and assets of the French market in the specialities of French aeronautics and space insurance. In this market, as in others, you tend to forget the unique and inviolable position that the French insurance market has for these specialities. So, in fact, nowhere else in the world is there such a full and homogeneous setup in the global ecosystem. So it starts with insurance players, companies, specialists, brokers, and agents. There's a very strong industrial footprint in France, with well-established names that we'll talk about, but there's a whole spectrum, a continuum of skills that are worth mentioning and promoting. And finally, a diversified and comprehensive mix of skills that are technical. I think technicality is a trademark, a hallmark of the French market in our specialities. Regarding the players in the insurance world, of course, you've got brokers, French and international brokers, and generalist companies and specialized players. French players with locations and offices or partnerships worldwide, roughly in London, of course, but also in the US, in China, in Russia, and many other countries that matter in air and space activities. And the French market is also attractive, as you were saying, Pierre, because many foreign groups themselves have taken the initiative to get a strong location in France. And all that applies to all specialities in our activities: air transport, airlines, space risk, as Mathieu recalled, aeronautics and space, manufacturing, and also general aviation, small aircraft. In France, it's one of the largest markets in the world, second only to the US market, the North American market, which is huge, but right behind it, there's a big gap, but this number two is the French market. However, that gives France an international reach, which, even though we don't realize it, which places it amongst the very first markets in the world besides London. A very positive, distinctive trait for the French air and space insurance market is that it's backed by a strong industry and full-fledged and high-performance industry that it serves, covering the full spectrum of skills. Industrial companies that are amongst the best in the world can rely on a dense fabric of companies, an ecosystem that I'll mention in a nutshell. Of course, you've got the big integrators, Airbus, Dassault, ATR, to name but the biggest ones, but also big systems and engines manufacturers, Safran and Thales, and they themselves supply the biggest manufacturers in the world. They're amongst the biggest suppliers for Airbus's competitors, and a continuum of sizes and contributions by subcontractors covering the whole value chain and skills chain. France, with the US, is one of the only countries to have the full range of skills to design and manufacture and produce large amounts of aeroplanes. Beyond these purely industrial and aviation-related aspects, there are also skills in the area of airports with ADP and Vinci Aéroport selling their products worldwide. What applies to aviation can extend to space with skills so that you can produce launch vehicles, spacecrafts, payloads, and ground systems with names that have already been mentioned, present in the space business: Airbus, Safran, Thales, Eutelsat, and Arianespace also is very well recognized. Some lesser known aspects with the BEA, Bureau Enquête Analyse, a commercial company. They don't sell products, but the fact that the BEA is regularly referred to for major accidents worldwide is a hallmark of very powerful soft power for French aeronautics skills. And I haven't listed it on the slide, but I'll mention it all the same because it matters. We have very high-level training for technicians and engineers, training many foreign students as well. All these setups, all these players sell their products and service their products on all continents, and they very often do that with a leading role. Airbus is the best known, but it also applies to many more players in this sector. What about the news for this enviable position? I think that I forgot to move to the next page. This enviable position of the industry, well, to take up the challenges that we're all busy with, net zero position, carbon neutrality is a concern in all areas of transport and also in the aeronautics business. I hope you all followed the discussion yesterday led by Jean-Claude Gez with the biggest luminaries of the Aerospace Academy that brilliantly illustrated how this complex matter can be dealt with all the clear-headedness that it requires. So a diversified and comprehensive mix of highly technical skills is ideally positioned to take up this technical, logistical, and diplomatic international challenge. Nothing can be done locally, so this reputational size of French industrial players is going to be essential. Industrially speaking, there are skills in design and manufacturing, the design of modified architectures and R&D. This is something that is obviously present in France at all levels of the industrial chain. There are also matters of energy. This is no longer purely aviation related, but energy production capacities are very well represented throughout the skills chain in France, starting from fossil fuels, nuclear energy, which is essential to produce decarbonized power, and also all the chemical processing chains that will need to be developed. And what also matters in these troubled times when everybody's looking for their way forward, we have good judgment capacities to find the best solution. And for the aviation sector, the same answers can't be brought whether you're talking about small aircraft, short-haul aircraft, medium-haul aircraft like the A320, to name the most iconic aircraft, and long-haul flights. These aren't the same solutions that are going to be adapted to these different cases, so it's important to have the good judgment abilities. In a nutshell, multidisciplinarity that was illustrated yesterday by the speakers from the Aerospace Academy yesterday, that illustrated the full range of skills of all the players in the French aeronautics ecosystem. And as specialized insurers, we are part of this ecosystem and we do intend to play our role fully.
Thank you, Michel, for this very comprehensive presentation. I'd like to turn to Elisabeth and Laurent. We're going to go back to the marine and transport insurance market. I'd like to rectify something I forgot earlier on when I introduced you. And following on the idea of having more women in the sector, Elisabeth is the president of the Association of Former Students of Les Mines in Alès. You have the floor, and you can talk to us about the strengths on the market seen from the insurer's side. And then Laurent will round things off by talking about things viewed from the agent's side. Thank you, Pierre. I'd like to start by giving you a rapid presentation of the strengths on the French market when it comes to marine and transport insurance. I won't be as specific as in the case of aviation, but I do believe that the last few years, as Matthew said in the figures, these last few years saw many upheavals with changes in cycle. I'm not going to compare just with the London market, but it is true that the change in the situation was kick-started by the London market, which contracted strongly. There was a contraction in transport with about 10 syndicates which withdrew, but then there were about 20 syndicates that withdrew elsewhere. And on the hull side, that was the impact. When it comes to goods, capacity remained high. And of course, this makes it possible to have capacity which is strongly present on the French market. We have a market with a big underwriting capacity, and it's stable. There was less volatility in terms of in and out capacity, and I think that this was fully appreciated by insured parties in the market. We have this underwriting capacity, which goes hand in hand with the financial stability, stable financial assets, which reassure and which also have made it possible to retain our underwriting capacity on the French market. That enabled us to benefit in part also from this global market, which is experiencing an upward swing. Solvability, that's expected on the cargo side. It's highly appreciated on the hull side because we remain, as stated yesterday, and it's important to underscore this, our specificity when it comes to claims management is very great. The French market has real value when it comes to the management of claims and the settlement of claims. It's also thanks to the role of Cézanne, with over 400 experts in any number of countries. Unless I'm mistaken, there are more than 60 countries. This enables us also to have this great expertise in claims handling. I think that's a very strong point, even if it has been underlined that our profitability on the market may have been impacted. Claims management is a real strength on the French market, and it's important, of course, to underscore our know-how in this area. I talked about diversification of products. Michel, you talked about things on the aviation side. We also have this specificity in France, and on the marine side, we can truly be present in any number of coverages. We have a huge breadth on the market. That's we're intervene in cargo, hull, construction, machinery, and as we saw yesterday, we cover risks of war. We have players on the yacht, pleasure craft, fishing vessel side. We have a whole range of insurers, and that provides great stability because they have considerable skills. And I think it's truly something we have to underscore. We're not just a followers market. We have a leader ability. We can set up programs, international programs, and we can also set up construction programs in various kinds of hull insurance. And these are real highlights when it comes to the French market. We have multiple skills when it comes to distributors, business providers. I'm thinking about our network of agents and brokers. If you look at the brokers network, we have a broad international network present on the market, and also specific players on the French market who have an historic knowledge. I'm thinking of the commodities market. They have great knowledge of Swiss traders, the African market, and on the construction side, we have international clients who provide business, Nordic, Turkish, Asian, and people from elsewhere. This international dimension needs to be underscored because it means this brings a lot of business to the French market. Also on the agent side, I'd like to give the floor to Laurent. Well, thank you very much for giving us the floor. It's a pleasure to speak here. Agents, well, we're a profession which is a very old one. Originally, we date back to the fact that insurance companies delegated powers to companies located near to the ports. It's a line of activity which today represents about 80 million in premiums in France. We're about 15, and it's a business which is growing strongly and which works hand in hand with insurers. We work well together, we get along well, and I think we can benefit from the excellent work accomplished by French brokers internationally, and that gives me an opportunity to thank them. I might talk about the situation today now. You can see the role of agents is developing for two reasons. First of all, the breakdown in risks. Big insurance companies tend to limit their exposure. That enables agents to play a ligand role on the market, and I think that's highly appreciated. And also, this growth is pushed by regulation. A lot of companies on the transport market, they represent about 5% of the non-life insurance market, and that makes it possible to have a company in one member state, and then some of these companies will extend their offers to other countries by using the MGA status, the managing general agent status. And we can see today that the number of players is becoming stable when it comes to insurance companies. And on the contrary, there's been an increase in the number of agents. I believe, in any event, that the way the offer is broken down in the French market between companies and agents, well, it works out extremely well. I have the impression, in any event, that things are constantly improving. There isn't the kind of mistrust that obtained sometimes in the past. We work together very happily. I'd also like to say that the innovations produced by agents over the past few years have been important. We, on the whole, are very small or medium-sized structures comprising between 25 and 30 people. So in terms of political risks, for example, in cargo, it's very easy for us in a short space of time to come up with an offer for several kinds of products, and that's very sought after on the market. Furthermore, I would like to say that there is a stability in the number of people working among the agent underwriters. Agents are often owners or shareholders in their company, and that makes it possible to have stable numbers, and that is well appreciated on the market. The insurer-agent link, I think, is beneficial for the whole of the market. Thank you. Laurent, we've understood how agents, brokers, and insurers can interact to strengthen the French market on the international scene. In a few minutes, I shall talk about prospects and the PARISMAT initiative. The goal of PARISMAT is to create visibility for the French market and communicate on the qualities developed by Elizabeth, Laurent, and Michel. Now how, and by doing what? You may recall that some 2 or 3 years ago, we gave a presentation of the French market in Greece in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce locally. Other similar initiatives were planned. Unfortunately, health restrictions made it impossible to organize this kind of event abroad. I hope we will soon be able to resume these meetings with people from different countries. Participation in other meetings of insurers and insured parties, FANAF, inter alia. There are also places where PARISMAT will be able to take the floor and burnish its reputation. PARISMAT also organizes webinars. They're organized with an editorial committee representing the various components, insurers, agents, and brokers. And the ecosystem we have, comprising experts, lawyers, and also insurers, shippers, ship owners. This enables us to continue to identify needs and risks, new risks, so that we can develop solutions which will enable all the players to conduct their business happily, transferring the risks that they're not able to shoulder. So the focal point is communication and information. And the second pillar, used by PARISMAT in the months and years to come, is training. Training for employees in insurance companies, employees of brokers and agents, but also the employees of insured parties in SMEs or big companies. So training and communication have already made PARISMAT a supplier of content, and we can highlight a strong identity, and we can increase the visibility of transport insurance in France and the specificities of the French players. Elisabeth, you might like to draw some last conclusions. We have 4 minutes left. You could talk about PARISMAT initiatives and the strengths of the French market. Well, I think that in the course of this discussion, we've seen how valuable the market is and how dynamic it is, too. As you said, Pierre, it's important to look at the future, to address questions raised by insurers in the future. There was a roundtable yesterday which talked about the future as well. I believe there are any number of questions, and also the ever more gigantic scale of things. That's not new, but it's a topic for the future, together with others, cyber attacks. We talked yesterday about piracy and banditry. I think all these issues are worth delving into. There are any number of topics we can look into. I think we have the requisite momentum to do so through training and by listening to the needs of insured parties, because this goes hand in hand with trends on the market. With General Xavier Doucet, we saw how dynamic things are in French shipping. We're perhaps very fortunate. We're privileged as insurers not to rank 19th when it comes to flagships. Our role is to lend weight to marine business in order to make French shipping really stand out. Any questions? You have a few more seconds if you want to send some questions through the chat. Thank you for your statements and this excellent roundtable. And we'll meet again after a partnership break. It's always an opportunity to hear about all sorts of ideas for innovation from technical and technological societies and companies. And then after the break, we'll talk about changes on the market in Africa, the CEMA